Hello and welcome to our round 9 recap of the 2024 FIDE candidates. Where going into this round, we had Gukesh and Nepomniachtchi equal on the lead on +2. And yeah, in this game between Gukesh and Pragnananda being the player in third place going into this round, half a point behind. Yeah, instead of playing a normal move like c3 or castles here, Gukesh decided to play the move bishop takes c6. Basically going for an anti-Berlin where the move a6 has been thrown in. And here the move c3 is already sort of very new for this particular position, but it's true that, say, if you throw in the moves castles and knight d7, but then c3 and d4 is kind of the main line for white, or at least the modern main line for white. So it's not that much of a stretch to consider that c3 is also a move even before black has retreated the knight, as it were. Also, yeah, if you're wondering why the recap's a little bit delayed, it's because I was busy traveling to Saigon on like a rather long bus trip. But yeah, here we are now, and we can see that in this position, yeah, black is just playing very solidly, just going for a dark squared strategy. Some more ambitious players might well go for a move like g5 and try to sack a pawn to open up lines against the white king, where definitely this would be in the style of, the game between Aronian against Kramnik in 2018 candidates, which feature a very nice way of punishing h3. But in the game, black plays a bit more solidly, and to be fair for this game, this was one where neither side had any massive chances. Like, the position here is probably a little bit better for white, because it's sort of easy for us to get an f4, and it's not so obvious what black's break should be in turn. Also note the pawn here is under fire, but black plays move bishop a6, hitting back here. Maybe the move c4 might have given white more chance of an edge, just going for like f4 once again, or if b5, just b3, and just kind of keeping control and keeping their bishop out of the game. But white played queen c2, black played knight d7, which turns out technically you probably can actually let them take the pawn and just say the bishop's kind of trapped afterwards. But we had knight d7 in the game, f4, and white has emerged with a little bit of a small advantage here, just having a bit more space in the center and slightly more active pieces. And actually, after the move c4, as we said, that black played very well to kind of neutralize white's edge, where the move b5 is a really nice way to start to get the bishop in the game. And after b3 and c5, well, black was able to kind of use some of these squares and basically was able to equalize from here. After knight f3, knight g6, bishop g3, queen d7. Maybe this is a point where perhaps white could have thought about a move like e5 and sort of got a pure kind of opposite color bishop's position without any other minor pieces, where the c5 pawn is fixed the target, and you never know if there may be some chances to go after the black king later, but that may be one of the better chances that the white had in the game. But the move in the game, knight h2, well, it has the idea of bringing the knight to g4, and we can't really call it a mistake by any means. Black played a4, just wanting to open up some lines on the queen side. bc4, bc4. And even after the opening of files, we can still see how the bishop on a6 is a little bit stuck, where probably black should actually go bishop c8 and try to exchange the bishop if possible. But the game saw bishop b7, rook b1, and now white starts to get a little bit of pressure. A move like knight e3 and focusing fire on g7 could actually, I think, make black's life kind of difficult, as he does have some weaknesses on the dark squares here. But in the game after queen f2, now it started to move a little bit closer to equality. Maybe here white can still claim some very small advantage, but it's only really one weakness we can get at, and black's covering it pretty well. When the knight bishop gets e6, they can just chop off our knight when it gets to f5 or d5. In the game after knight d5, well, Prague showed that probably don't even need to rush with bishop d5, that in this case it probably does just help white here to control the e file. So instead, black plays a move rook a1, and just happy to swap things off. If you are enjoying the video, by the way, do make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing. But the way it played out, very balanced. Black has no weaknesses. The knight's just as good, if not better, than the bishop here. But white's got some activity to work with, and having reached move 40, the players agree to draw. If black does try to play on, we can also try to be annoying without queen, and draw is kind of a fair result here in a way. So yeah, good game by both players. White had a little bit of pressure, but never any, let's say, outright winning continuations by any means. Let's now see the next game between Abasov against Caruana. We can see that this one also ended in a draw, but with a couple of adventures where Caruana played this bishop b4 like a kind of accelerated Rogozin where, because the knight is on, we have the move d5 instead of knight f6. This does give white some good extra options compared to a Nimzo, and arguably also a Rogozin where the move a3 is a pretty thematic counter, where you just sort of make the point that, in a same-ish Nimzo Indian, you wouldn't really play d5 because it helps white undouble the pawns. But yeah, Caruana plays this move of c6, which basically the positional idea of playing c6 is to play something like b6 and eventually in a position like this to go bishop a6 and trade off the white bishop pair. From there, then I can sort of maneuver towards c4, and it is something I've played myself in the past as black with black basically getting a fine position. So it means white has to do something a little bit special to try to demonstrate some sort of tangible advantage, and that's why Abasov played the move of a4 first. So that, now b6 is a little bit too slow, because we can play bishop a3 and, make it very hard for black to get the king castled, as it were. So Caruana, for this reason, castles. Bishop d3 was played, but in hindsight it may be more precise to play the tempo game with bishop a3 and then knight f3, which would be a little bit more flexible and avoid what black does in the game, because in the game black found a very nice move here where, to be fair, you could still play b6 in the usual plan and it would still be playable, but e5 is, a very perceptive move by Caruana, realizing that when white takes, because if you don't take like e4 and kicking the bishop is just really annoying for white, but after takes dc4 we realize that we're actually not even sacking a pawn here as black, because knight g4 does get it back. The game went king e1, knight e5, and this game was kind of interesting to see how, Caruana managed to get this position that, does give black a little bit of pressure, like a bit like we saw with the Gukesh Prague game just before, how the opposite colored bishops do create winning chances when there are a lot of other pieces on the board. So bishop e6, just eyeing those weaknesses on the light squares that the white dark square bishop can't really cover. Knight d2 is a good move to at least cover the squares that way. Black played c5, c4, and this was probably the key moment of the game where black had probably his best chance to ask some questions, where the somewhat counterintuitive move a5 is probably the play here, just so that you can kind of play like knight c6, bring the knight to b4, and essentially fix these pawns as weaknesses on the light squares, which ends up being more important than the fact that, white's, the black's pawn majority can't easily make a pass pawn, as it were. In the game, black played the more obvious knight c6, but after a5, the plan of playing knight a5 is thwarted, and it basically means that now white is just doing okay. The game never really veered from equality from this point. Like, black does have the d-file occupation, but it's not that easy to actually make use of it. Rook b5, knight e5 is a little bit of a tricky move, setting up a couple of tactical ideas as such. But it turns out that the exchange of the knights is not as scary as it first looks. Initially it might seem like rook d2 and the threats are really strong, but actually it turns out in the game white just played bishop g3 and it's kept his king very safe. After a6, rook 7, rook a5. It might look like black has some tiny something with the past a pawn, but white's pieces are just too active to stop this being such a big factor, and king's in the center, but it is an endgame after all. It's not like black can really give weaver mating net in this case. So king e4. Abasov kind of has the right idea, like, as long as he holds and doesn't really do anything kind of stupid, like, he's just gonna hold the draw. I don't know if it may even be possible to play for more with a move like f3 and try to bring the bishop in and take the pawn, but in the game, white was just happy just to go bishop d6 directly and just hoover off the pieces one way or another, where again, not a whole lot to really play for, and once the rooks get traded, it's an ironclad draw, which is why the draw was agreed at move, it was move 44 in the game at this point. So these first two games, were fairly balanced for the most part, with some small opportunities, but nothing too major. Whereas the next two games, we kind of had a bit more a bit more fight to him in a certain sense. Where Fallujah actually, yeah, it's kind of a funny point that all the other games in the tournament went with either E4 or with D4, and it took until round 9 for someone to play a flank opening. But Fallujah's choice just avoiding Fury and just playing the Nimzo last, and actually worked out pretty well in this game, where after G3, to move to C5, it's certainly not as automatic as playing a move like E6, for example, and just developing more like a normal London, but okay, black played C5, bishop E2, knight C6, castle E6, D3, bishop E7, and a point to note is that black's not really rushing the play to move H6, and that's because of knight H4 that black can just maneuver the bishop around like this, and after G4, black even had some tricky moves like knight takes G4 actually, where they can sacrifice a piece but get a really strong attack on the king side with this H pawn. Like very computerish idea, but it wouldn't shock me if Nepo had prepared this before the game, given the for the tournament, given the speed of his play. Also, knight e5 is another way to try to recycle the pieces and get in e4, but yeah, in the game, White just played knight d2, castle, went for the move rook e1 to prepare e4 in that way. Like I do think that knight e5 is maybe a more efficient way to perhaps prepare the e4 push, but yeah, Fallujah decided that he wanted to keep more pieces on the board. The move h6 was played, e4, bishop h7. This is all fairly standard, you could say, but now with the move knight e5, White does start to get this tiny bit of pressure. Because the thematic response for black in such positions is to play like knight d7 and bishop f6, and kind of funny I showed this position because it's actually a position I was analysing with a couple of students quite a bit earlier this year. But here black does get quite decent play on the queen side in general. And okay, it makes sense that Fallujah probably prepared the move c4 and this injured idea of putting the pressure on the d5 pawn as such. But anyway, I digress a little bit, because in the game black played d4, which I think is a move we're quite happy to see as white. Like, this structure is one where the bishop is really quite passive on h7, the d7 knight would rather be on c6. And yeah, you wish your bishop was on c1 rather than b2, but other than that, the pieces are kind of on decent squares. And it's sort of easier for white to correct the position of his pieces than it is for black to correct the position of his pieces, as it were. Bishop h3 is a nice move, just activating the bishop. Not just automatically playing, say, f5 and letting black just kind of blockade on the dark squares, but instead showing a little bit more energy and putting some pressure against the center. So black played a move bishop d6 to cover it. The computers in these positions usually want to take and just kind of sit on the position, but of course from a human point of view it's kind of unpleasant to play against such a strong center. But the idea is in a lot of cases you'll see black play a move like f5 and kind of stabilize things on the king side a little bit in this way. Although even here white would admittedly still be quite a lot better, so it's sort of a case where the options are only sort of relatively more or less bad for black rather than even being especially good. Now after bishop d6, bishop c1, queen to c6, white continue to play pretty decent moves where I think I maybe like the idea of recycling the bishop and playing f5 immediately, because I do think that the black bishop is quite passive, and in a position like this I think white has pretty good chances to to win the game, as it were, because white has a pawn break and black's pawn break is not as obviously good, to put it mildly. But white played knight d6 immediately, and what's sort of becoming a little bit of a theme for this video, white decided not to play the standard f5 in this way, but to go for the opposite coloured bishop and bishop position instead. And this position is much better for white. The bishop is very stuck, and our bishop has a lot more scope in a certain sense, especially again g5. That being said, I do wonder if this was necessarily the best way for white to prosecute his advantage, because even if black just plays a move like a5 at some point, like he did in the game, which maybe is the reason why white should go a5 himself to may make it a bit harder for black to keep things closed in the future. But from the game after rook e2, king d6, bishop d2, a5, it just becomes kind of difficult for white to break through, where you go g5, but there's only really one weakness you can kind of get at once the pawns get traded. The game went rook h2, king c7, rook f1, just getting all the pieces in motion. If you play g5 a bit too early, then the risk is that you run into something like g6 and black can sort of get counterplay in this way. Because f6 h5 is of course just a fortress. So after rook f1, just keeping a bit more tension and ensuring that g5 comes with a little bit more strength, where you don't really want to rush to play hg5 because you're kind of threatening g6 and forcing some big concessions from black as a result. So black plays more solidly bishop g8, just trying not to let white in. And now a good move from Firouzja in the move of h5, not letting black to play h5 himself and kind of stabilize that way. Also, something I didn't mention as well, but actually early in this game, Firouzja basically Abbasov had sort of made a complaint that Firouzja was making too much noise when he was walking too loudly. So then the arbiter, chief arbiter, kind of asked Firouzja to basically walk, not as loud and to walk more softly. And Firouzja kind of complained about after the game on Twitter about how it broke his concentration, but we had to focus more on the chess and on the drama, let's say. So if black's able to trade off everything, it's just going to be a pretty clear draw, but white found the very nice move rook g6, sacrificing exchange, but keeping up the pressure, where now these pawns are fixed as very clear weaknesses. The passed g-pawn is also a thing. And we have to give black credit here for finding a right defense, because a normal move like rook f8 is actually already losing after, say, queen f5, where there's just not a lot black can really do just to avoid the bishop coming to h4 and these pawns just dropping like flies from there, because black can't bring the rook on h8 in time to defend the pawn as such. So credit to Nepo for finding the move rook e8. I think a lot of lesser players would have collapsed here as black, but he just managed to just kind of hold this fortress where white just wasn't really able to get through. Optically, the position looks very nice for white, but the players just kind of realize there's just nothing you can really do to get through as white. If you play a move like c3, you're just helping black to open rooks, and you're basically killing your own game rather than improving it here. So draw was agreed, and it was looking kind of dicey for Nepo in the early middle game around this stage. But with some very good defense, he was able to save the draw. And actually, the commentators after this game kind of made the point that Nepo was the best defensive player alive, and maybe Carlsen's ahead of him, but definitely at least number 2 based on this game. Anyway, let's see the final game between Vidit against Nakamura, and this one we can see that, going into round, Nakamura was half a point off the lead, but with this loss, now Vidit and Nakamura are both on 50% with 5 rounds to play. 5 rounds to play. So let's see how it happened. Black decided to take some risks with the move of h6 and going for this modern setup with g5, which, maybe doesn't give full equality for black, but does give some interesting positions. And, given that Nakamura has a lot of experience with King's Indian positions and moderns, this is kind of not such a stretch for him to play in this kind of spirit within e4, e5 as well. All these moves are pretty normal, white's going for the light squared strategy, black is going for the dark squared strategy. So bishop e6, rook e1, all pretty standard. You could argue for potentially something more direct, say going g4 and trying to go d5 and sort of open up the position a bit more for black's pieces. But of course, this would come with a little bit of risk as well, where perhaps black didn't like the idea of the knight coming into c5, for example, or even the g3 and exploring some of the kingside weaknesses in this way. Though it is true, black probably is still doing fine here with good play, but black decided to play a bit more patiently in the game, going rook e8, h3, queen d7, and bishop d2, rook d8. And I guess, Vidit was probably a little bit surprised by this setup, whereas, Nakamura is still playing relatively quickly. I guess in this position, you could make an argument for a few different plans, but, in general, black's just going to be looking for the right moment to play d5 and liberate his pieces. Which is also why white's placed the knights like so, to increase the pressure on e5. But after queen c2, this does open the door, for example, for a move like knight h5 and trying to bring the knight in. Because in the other lines, they might have knight e5 in response, but here it's not going to be a thing. With queen c8 and going for d5's the engine's line, but the move b6 in the game is also quite solid. We had bishop a2, knight h5 is played now. Knight e3 is a good move, just eyeing up that weakness of f5, which black does cover with the move knight e7. And yeah, at this point, I mean, a move like b4 deserves some attention, just trying to open up the queen side and potentially get a passed pawn with a5 in the next moves. But in the game, white decided to play in the center with the move d4. We had take, d5, black hits back in the center. Obviously, we don't really want to be saddled with an IQP when the rook's on a2 and such. So e5 was played. And this was kind of one of the key moments of the game, actually, because, for around this point, Vidit started to kind of get an advantage and sort of outplay Nakamura a little bit. Whereas I think if black goes knight f4 here and just kind of takes a semi-outpost, I feel like black's actually doing quite fine. Like, the knight can come around to g6. Also, moves like c5 will often come in, where you can just sort of get in like what Nakamura did in the game, but kind of in a better version, where you sort of wait for him to take and then you play rook c8. And then whether you take with the pawn or the rook, it also depends on what they do. But black does get pretty decent piece play and can possibly make the argument that later the pawn e5 may also become a weakness. But black instead played the move rook c8 and then went for the move c5. And this ends up being a less effective move order, as it does give white, sort of opens the door for white to go knight g4 and to sort of exploit some of the weaknesses, because like cd4, queen e3 just kind of allows white to just sort of pile the pressure, like rook b3, and it's actually kind of hard for black to keep everything defended at once in a sense. Like if you play queen d8, for example, then white can even play moves like queen f5 and just even go quite directly for an attack, just sidelining the knight and making a point at g5 does create long-term weaknesses around the king. The game, however, saw dc5 instead, and knight f4 is not the easiest move in the world to find, but it does prove quite valuable not to let this pawn come under pressure later. Because after rook c5 and queen d1, queen b3 is the engine's choice, but I guess white didn't want to, shut in his own rook, which might feel a bit inhuman here. But queen d1 was played, knight f4, b4, just to get the pieces into play, with, takes, and having some pressure on e7 being the idea. To be fair, even here, like, black's probably still doing okay in a position like this, but in the game, I guess, he didn't want to allow, like, some pressure in this sort of way, where white has, some tricks to work with. So rook c8 just keeps a bit more of the tension, where, it sacrifices a pawn, but black does get pretty decent play for it, with a fork on these two guys. Bishop c3, and this was sort of the key moment in the game where it sort of shifted from being, still an okay-ish position for black to just being very difficult. Now, here I think the dream for black is being able to get in the move d4, and for this reason I think that the move rook d8 was probably the play. After knight g4, like, white's still better, but at least you've got counterplay with the pawn on d3, and, white's piece is also a little bit tied to the defense of the extra pawn, so it's a position that, I would sort of back Nakamura as one of the best defenders in the world to, be able to probably hold this position with, on a good day. Instead, however, he played the move knight e5, and first it looks very natural, you just win back the pawn, but the problem is after bishop e5, white now found a very nice move of knight takes d5, discovering an attack on the bishop to just win a clear pawn. The game went take, queen e6. Yeah, my brain kind of auto-corrected for queen d6, which is better, but probably still doesn't save the game. After queen e6, white goes rook d3, just lining it up against the knight. Knight f4, rook d6, and again, we can kind of see how the weakness of the black king is really coming to bite black here. Though it's true, white is up 2 pawns even without that. Well, the game ended queen b2, queen d7, threatening a mate. And they can't take our knight because then their rook would be hanging as such. So the game ended queen b3, queen f5, knight g6, rook g6, and it's pretty easy to figure out that the black's just losing the house here. And so for this reason, black just resigned. Quite an interesting round there, where, at the end of it, we can say that, still leaders are the same, Gukesh and Nepomniachtchi an equal first on 5.5 out of 9. And it's sort of an interesting case where, like, Gukesh is, I think, showing the better form overall, but Nepo is kind of being very tenacious and basically saving a lot of, like, very bad positions. And, when you have this sort of kind of, like, good luck sort of backed up by just being a very good defender, it's kind of very hard not to win the tournament in a sense. But I'd say I do still have faith that with Gukesh's form that he definitely still has a decent shot to win the whole candidates. And I don't remember what the round 10 pairings were, but it'll definitely be interesting to see them play out. Also, put in the comments below what was the favorite move of the round today, or your favorite game that we saw here. In any case, I will see you for the recap tomorrow for round 10. It's kind of lucky for me that the date I'm kind of flying back to Sydney is also the rest day for the candidates, so that kind of worked out quite well. But yeah, I will see you for the next one, and until then, take care.